Buildings crumbled as people ran, screaming for their lives. SCP-682 was loose, tearing up streets, smashing cars, attacking anyone unlucky enough to be close enough. The Foundation had exhausted all its options. They tried sending in SCP-2800, Cactus Man, but this spiky superhero had fallen. The Spectre. SCP-4494 had tried in vain to halt the advance of the hard-to-destroy reptile, but the physical manifestation of crime fighting hadn't been strong enough to withstand the monster's attacks. There was only one remaining hope: the most powerful SCP. SCP-6101 and his trusty sidekick, SCP-6101-1, arrived on the scene, flying fast enough to break the sound barrier as they arrived. They'd both been prepared for this by Foundation researchers, who had presented the dynamic duo with tissue samples taken from SCP-682. SCP-6101 had effortlessly been able to erase it from existence, while his canine companion had eaten her sample. They were ready to take on the reptile. SCP-682, realizing another challenger dared to approach it, snarled and taunted. SCP-6101 looked like little more than an ordinary human child, with no abnormal features, nothing anomalous about it. This would be easy. Undeterred though, SCP-6101 drew his signature guns, Fear and Loathing, and fired a barrage of pure light and pure darkness. The volley of shots struck SCP-682's claw, immediately erasing it from existence. Injured, terrified at having lost a limb, SCP-682 immediately changed its demeanor, now begging SCP-6101 to spare its life. But instead of listening to the monster's plea, SCP-6101 raised Loathing and fired a fatal shot. At long last, SCP-682 was neutralized, for good this time, earning SCP-6101 the Foundation's highest honor award from the O5 Council as thanks. There was never any doubt of SCP-6101's victory. He was, after all, the most powerful SCP. In 2019, the existence of various anomalous organizations, including the SCP Foundation, became known to the public. The advent of the Broken Masquerade also happened to coincide with another significant event in the history of the anomalous: the birth of the child who would one day become SCP-6101. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, and named Ethan Prosper, the young boy would be one of the first to grow up in a world where the Foundation no longer operated in the shadows, something that would alter the very course of the child's life. With the details of their operations made entirely public, the Foundation was known to civilians across the world. Children were taught about what the SCP Foundation did in schools. Their containment efforts were broadcast on the news, and every move they made was discussed and even rightly criticized by politicians all across the world. The impact this knowledge of the Foundation had on little Ethan as he grew up was undeniable. He came to idolize the anomalous organization. To him, they perfectly fit with another love he developed over his childhood: a love of superheroes. Ethan Prosper adored superheroes. From the moment he was old enough to talk, it was practically the only thing he ever talked about. Teachers would award him gold stars for his drawings of himself alongside various famous comic book heroes. His earliest book reports, written in unkept handwriting, about the second-hand Marvel comics that his parents picked up at a yard sale. In the pages of those comics, Ethan didn't just learn the basics of reading, but also found something more: inspiration. When Ethan was asked to present to his class about what he wanted to be when he grew up, he went all out. Instead of a simple speech, he created a massive comic on A3-sized paper, illustrating himself as a superpowered hero, fighting alongside the SCP Foundation to battle dangerous anomalies and protect the world from the unknown. There was, however, maybe only one thing that Ethan loved more than superheroes: his pet dog, Heidi. The pair were inseparable, with the energetic pooch being fiercely protective of her human best friend. As such, it was hardly a surprise that Ethan included her in his presentation as his sidekick, Heidi the Hero Hound. But less than a decade after Ethan was born, tragedy struck. One day in 2028, the boy had been playing outside with Heidi in the backyard while his parents were in the house. Neither one saw any cause for concern. After all, they lived in a quiet neighborhood, and Ethan was never more than a few short feet from the house. Suddenly, both parents noticed a distinct difference in Heidi's barks. She often barked when playing, but this sound had changed. It was distressed, mixed with whines and whimpers that conveyed something was wrong. Rushing to the back garden, Ethan's parents practically felt their hearts stop the second they saw their son lying face down on the grass, still and barely breathing. An ambulance quickly arrived at the Prosper home, rushing a still unconscious Ethan to the emergency room of nearby Les Bonheurs Children's Hospital. He was rushed in by paramedics, stable but clearly suffering from something. Ethan's distraught parents spent hours in the hospital, pacing anxiously through the sterile corridors, their minds racing with fear. Exhaustion eventually forced them into restless sleep, sprawled uncomfortably across cold benches, only to jolt awake at every passing footstep or voice. Desperate for answers, they pleaded with nurses, doctors, anyone who would listen, frantically asking for updates on Ethan's condition, their hearts heavy with worry for their son. It had already been dark for hours when the doctors were able to offer an explanation. Ethan's condition had been stabilized, but the boy was very, very ill. In fact, he was terminal. Aware that they weren't fully equipped to treat him, the staff at Les Bonheurs arranged for Ethan to be transferred to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. There he would remain hospitalized, though there was little that could be done to cure his condition. Ethan's parents tried to maintain some semblance of hope that the treatment options the doctors at St. Jude's were looking into would work. After all, they lived in a world where the anomalous was public knowledge, and some new cure could be right around the corner, but there was no guarantee. Both put on brave faces for their son, but as weeks slowly became months and Ethan showed no signs of improvement, it became increasingly obvious to his parents their only child would soon be gone. The only comfort, besides his parents' encouragement for him to get better, was having occasional visits from Heidi. One of the nurses assigned to check on Ethan helped the boy's parents sneak the dog into his room at the hospital, shutting the door and closing the blinds so that no other staff noticed an animal on the premises. The months started ticking down, closer and closer to the time the doctors predicted Ethan's illness would become too aggressive to survive. His parents tried to find as many ways as they could to make their son's remaining time as enjoyable as possible. They reached out to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, the charitable organization that fulfills the wishes of terminally ill children. When a representative from Make-A-Wish met with Ethan and asked him what wish he had always wanted to come true, the superhero idolizing boy who'd grown up in a world of the anomalous had only one answer. He wanted to become an anomaly. Not just becoming anomalous, but being officially declared as the most powerful SCP by the Foundation themselves. And he wanted to help them contain other anomalies too. Ethan Prosper wanted to be a superhero. The SCP Foundation's Department of Public Relations had only been around a few short years since the masquerade was broken. Whenever interacting directly with members of the public, the team were instructed to be as obliging as possible, unless doing so would jeopardize any ongoing containment efforts or Foundation investigations. So when they received a call from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, they had quite the dilemma on their hands. On one of those hands, they wanted to offer the help they could to grant Ethan's wish. On the other, there were still some Foundation operations that had to remain secret from the public. Granting a child, even a terminally ill child, access to the tiniest portion of the SCP Foundation might pose a potential security threat. So realizing this decision was far too important to be left in their hands, the Department of Public Relations raised it with the highest authority within the Foundation that they could, the O5 Council. The Council debated the request for several hours, before eventually coming to a unanimous decision. They would grant Ethan Prosper's wish, viewing it as an opportunity to strengthen public relations. Answering a request from Make-A-Wish would certainly paint the SCP Foundation in a positive light in the eyes of the public, potentially allowing them to continue their more nefarious anomalous activities with far less scrutiny. People were often more willing to turn a blind eye to the bad that the Foundation did if they were seen doing something so unilaterally good. Much to Ethan's surprise and joy, the next visitors to his hospital room at St. Jude's were a team of Foundation staff straight from Site-301. The boy could barely contain his excitement, speaking and moving faster and with more enthusiasm than he'd been for months during his long battle with his illness. The Foundation staff, headed by Site Director Rushpa Chakravarti, explained that they were designating Ethan SCP-6101, registering him as the most powerful anomaly that the Foundation had ever encountered. Alongside him was Heidi, now referred to as SCP-6101-1, the pair of them classified as Thaumiel. According to the details included in SCP-6101's entry within the Foundation database, he was too powerful to contain and was to be left in the care of his family until the Foundation ever needed to call on his assistance. Ethan was free to describe the full details of his powers to the Site-301 staff, and with his love for comics, he had no shortage of ideas. If anything, he was spoiled for choice. The extent of SCP-6101's powers would remain unknown. However, his entry in the archives mentioned him displaying flight, super strength, and invisibility along with every superpower associated with all of the superhero characters published by Marvel Comics. SCP-6101 was also considered to be anomalously brave and capable of accomplishing anything he set his mind to, a note added by a staff member who praised Ethan's courage in facing his terminal condition. According to drawings and descriptions given by Ethan, as SCP-6101, he carried 2 guns with him at all times, named Fear and Loathing, which were capable of firing bullets of pure light and darkness respectively. On contact with an anomalous monster, these bullets could erase their target from existence. SCP-6101-1 was also recorded as being fiercely loyal to SCP-6101, and was regarded as the second most powerful SCP, protecting her owner from any anomalous organizations seeking to use his powers for themselves. Over the course of role-playing together, the Foundation staff visiting Ethan staged multiple imaginary containment breaches of various dangerous anomalies for SCP-6101 to battle or help the Foundation recontain. There was even an imaginary battle against SCP-682, or rather, a staff member dressed as the reptile. On May 18, 2028, came the ultimate finale in the epic saga they had staged for SCP-6101. Director Chakravarti reported that a highly dangerous anomaly, SCP-Omega, had broken free from its containment and was causing havoc, so much so that all the Foundation's efforts to recapture it had failed. Chakravarti called upon SCP-6101's assistance, and Ethan was escorted from his room at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital to Site-301, protected by members of Mobile Task Force Psi-301, also known as Genie, in a battle. Secretly, SCP-Omega was nothing more than another staff member in disguise, playing along so Ethan could engage in an imaginary battle, but that didn't dampen the excitement for the 9-year-old hero. With telekinetic powers and verbal threats, he intimidated SCP-Omega, forcing the rogue anomaly back into its containment cell. As the doors sealed shut, the onlooking staff erupted into cheers and applause, celebrating Ethan's victory. Site-301 director Rushpa Chakravarti held a special ceremony shortly after, where an SCP-6101 was awarded with a rare honor, a Foundation Star, as a commendation for his bravery in defeating SCP-Omega. It had not only given Ethan a boost to his confidence, but was also one of the happiest days of his life. The SCP Foundation's Department of Public Relations would later publicize SCP-6101's file, and his bravery was even reported on by local news outlets. The story about him defeating so many dangerous anomalies became an inspiration to countless other terminally ill children like him. Ethan Prosper had become a superhero. Donations to the Make-A-Wish Foundation surged when details of Ethan's heroism became public, allowing them to assist with the recoveries of numerous other sick children. It remains unknown what happened to SCP-6101 after his historic victory. Non-disclosure agreements between the SCP Foundation and Make-A-Wish, as well as respect for the family's privacy, had meant that the exact details of what became of him have never been made public. Some have expressed optimistically that Ethan was able to make a full recovery and overcame his illness, though it's just as likely that he tragically perished sometime after his wish was granted. You see, it wasn't anomalous abilities that made SCP-6101 the most powerful SCP. It was the hope and comfort that it provided a young boy when faced with the end of his life far too soon. Now check out Dr. Bright is Not Allowed to Create the SCP Justice League and SCP-2241 Superhero Wannabe for more.